Well, good morning. This may look a little different for your KASB Live. For one thing, we don't think we're really live. This is the first week of the post Rob Gilligan
That's
world.
right.
So we're doing this a little differently. We hope to be kind of back with the usual studio soon, but for now, we're just trying to find our way through
That's
YouTube
right.
Live. So nonetheless, Leah and I are going to try to give you an update of the Kansas Legislature. I guess if you happen to find us live, you can try to send in your questions.
That's right.
But more to the point, whenever you view this, we're recording this at about 9:30 Friday
Right.
morning, and we'll try to give you an update on what's going on. Let's start by just kind of quickly reviewing some of the events of the past week that is just ending, and then we will go, if we can keep Leah's screen up, to the bills coming up next week. I guess I'll start going back and some of the action that took place in the Senate Education Committee. Monday or Tuesday was a hearing on Senate Bill 335, which would give school districts the authority to pay the tuition and fees of students in academic concurrent enrollment programs. So this is a distinction from the Senate Bill 125. We sometimes call it the 155 or Excel in CTE, where basically students can take CTE courses at no charge. Well, school districts have long had the authority to have partnerships with local higher education where students can get both high school and college credit at the same time. But the way the law is worded, it's interpreted that school districts can't pay for any of this. Some districts would like to use their general fund dollars to help support these programs. This bill, would give them authority to do so. Some questions about the bill. I think the committee is generally supportive. They've started working it kind of with some technical amendments. They have not finished it yet. We'll keep you posted on that. The other thing that began discussion this week, really a critical bill for the session, is Senate Bill 271. This is the bill that would repeal the sunset, which occurs this year on high density weighting. That would cost districts with higher percentages of low income students about $50 million. The committee's work so far was to extend the sunset 3 years, but not take it away, which is how the bill was introduced. Why is this? Well, frankly, there's just a lot of legislative concern about how those dollars are being used after the post audit from legislative post audit came out just before the session started. They're not done working on the bill. We think it's very likely they're going to have some additional, for want of a better word, accountability provisions looking at how programs are approved or how districts spend those dollars. Similarly, the House K-12 Budget Committee had a hearing Monday on House Bill 2540, which doesn't extend or do anything with the sunset, but it makes changes in the whole at-risk program that would require the state board to develop a list of best practice and effective evidence-based programs. Districts would have to choose off that list. The state board could continue to add to and update that list. So that bill had a hearing. It has not been worked yet, but we see these two things coming together. And I guess if there's a single most important thing I think we would say right now for school leaders to be doing, it is to be documenting how you are using your at-risk funds, how you determine the programs, how you work with the state board, what you do internally to decide how your dollars are justified by best practice, the students you're serving, and what results you're getting. Legislature is looking at the fact that we've not seen much improvement in our state assessment scores, ACT scores. Of course, the response from many school leaders is we're still coming out of 8 years of underfunding. Legislature saying, well, you're now in the third year of new funding coming in.
They want to know when they're going to see results.
When are we going to see results? What are those results? You may not have all of those results, but what are you doing to measure your programs locally? So the most important thing over the next few weeks is for you to be talking to your legislators about what you're doing, help justify and show what you're doing, and then we'll keep you informed on how the legislature is taking a look at that. Would just note on a couple more school finance issues, the Senate Ways and Means Committee had a hearing yesterday on the Department of Education budget. They'll take action later today at noon. The House K-12 Budget Committee will hold its hearing Monday and are supposed to take action, I believe, next Thursday. There's really one main issue for many school leaders. That is the fact that the state board is suggesting that some savings or underspending in money approved last year that is not needed because base state aid the estimates have been cut back because of lower enrollment. State board says, let's put that into our special education state aid to make progress toward the 92% of excess cost target. Governor Kelly did not recommend that. It is always very difficult to move money around because the governor puts together a budget, and generally speaking, if you're going to spend more money than that, you have to take it from somewhere else, or at minimum taken out of ending balances. But a very powerful testimony yesterday. That really is the other issue that the legislature will be looking at that could have an impact on district budgets. And I might make just a couple of other quick Senate bills. Leah is going to talk, I promise, but some things I've been noting. Senate Bill 299, which would bring school board elections for races if your district has more than 5,000 students under the State Campaign Finance Act. Had a hearing a couple weeks ago. No action so far, unknown, doesn't really look like that bill may make it, but it will be up to the committee whether they vote sometime really this week or, well, this is really the last week they could probably do that. And then maybe the biggest news, maybe from my perspective, because last week I was involved in a hearing before the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee on what they call a truth in taxation bill that would have required local units to spend any more property tax money, whether your budget's going up, whether your population's going up, whether your valuation's going up. To spend any more money, you would have to go through a much more complex process of notice and mailing out individual taxpayer notice of this increase to justify it. Board could still do it, but it had to go through that process. We argued last week that school district spending is already very much LOB is capped at 30%, or you have to have an election to go to 33%. Property or capital outlay, already subject to protest petition. Bond and interest, you have to have an election. Equalization means that you can have changes every year in your state aid, which could have an impact on your local mill levy. So the good news was that yesterday, Senate committee removed schools from the application of this bill. So we want to thank the committee for doing that. Frankly, for your local government, for instance, cities and counties, who also would be subject to this. Big news there was the bill was also amended to remove the tax lid, which was a real concern for
very unpopular with many of our other local government friends.
Exactly. And so that's a pretty important tax bill moving through. It was recommended out of committee. We'll monitor that. So that's kind of on the Senate side. The House has put a number of bills are starting to come out of committee as well. We're going to mention a few of those if we can read my handwriting, which is looking more and more difficult, but now I think I can. So Leah, I'm going to give you the topic and then you can explain it. 2487 is the bill dealing with emotional
disturbance.
Yes, so that bill, you recall?
Yes. That bill would change the reference when we're talking about special ed students. It would just change the reference from a student who has an emotional disturbance, which is kind of outdated language, I think the practitioners feel, to just emotional disability.
That's right. All the bill does, not very controversial. Interesting vehicle, though, but let's not go there. And then also sent out of the Education Committee's House Bill 2488.
Emergency medication.
Yes.
This is a bill that we supported. It allows school districts, say the school nurse or whoever, to have a prescription written by a local doctor that authorizes let's just say School X, to have a few extra kits kits of, say, EpiPens or inhalers, something like that, that help treat life-threatening situations. The pharmacist would fill that prescription for the school. The school would have them on hand, and an employee could, in a good faith effort to save someone's life, use that kit. So the bill also removes some civil liability concerns for the prescribing doctor, for the pharmacist, and for the staff that might, in good faith, try to administer that treatment.
So the School Nurses Association groups, they
That's
work
right.
with the support of this. We are also a proponent of that. So good bill moving forward.
Yeah.
That's one that does need to be advanced, we believe. We don't have the same degree of enthusiasm for House Bill 2468, I believe. That is an expansion of the tax credit bill for private schools.
Right.
Leah, what's in that bill?
That says that students who are free or reduced lunch, which is an expansion of current law, and who attend any public school, that's also an expansion of current law. Currently now it's free lunch students who attend the 100 lowest performing elementary schools could get a tax credit scholarship to go to a private school. That's a voucher. You could call it tax credit, you could call it an education savings account. As I like to say, if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's a voucher. So we oppose that bill. It did pass out of committee.
So I've had a couple questions from legislators wanting to know how that works. And the key policy change, number one is the bill does not authorize any more money for the program.
Correct.
There's a cap, which we have not reached, on how many tax credits can be awarded,
right,
which is really the state's cost.
Mm-hmm.
It is a state cost because money is lost to give tax
right,
credits to contributions.
And that cap is $10 million.
Correct. The big issue is this philosophically shifts from a bill targeted at schools with the lowest test scores, which, as we know, they'll often call failing schools,
those are schools in poverty.
Tend to be schools with
poor kids.
High poverty. But the argument at least was we are focusing on the highest need kids. This change, of course, simply opens it up to any lower income student, which means almost half the kids in the state would qualify for, no matter how well they're doing or not well they're doing. There's no academic requirement on these students. These do not have to be low performing students. These can be the top performing students in the school, but if they meet the income qualification, could transfer with the support of this program. So at best, I think everyone would agree it is a change in philosophy of how the program was originally designed. Expect that to probably be a close vote if it comes up. The House has generally been skeptical of these expansions, but it was originally a House bill that helped move this forward when the program was created several years ago.
That's true.
Another issue that we're following is the issue of vaping because of the impact on schools and youth. The House Judiciary Committee has recommended House Bill, again, if I can read my writing, 2450, House Bill 2450. A big part of that is it expands the definition of cigarette under the Indoor Clean Air Act, which prohibits smoking in schools to include electronic cigarettes. So this would put the force of state law behind your local district policies. That's really its focus. A broader bill, House Bill 2563, had a hearing just this week, and you were there for that.
That really focused on vaping and whether it's available, whether vape shops should have to pay an increased fee. So the 2563, I don't believe is going to go anywhere.
Because it also has
the T21 provisions, and there didn't seem to be a whole lot of enthusiasm for that. But the Indoor Clean Air Act that we support, because you will probably recall we adopted legislative policy in December supporting efforts to control vaping. So we are supporting the 2450, which is the Indoor Clean Air Act.
Another bill which came out of committee without recommendation, which means its prospects are not very good, is House Bill 2503. That is a bill that would adopt the governor's recommendation to re-amortize capers, sort of similar, not quite as dramatic as a re-amortization bill she proposed last year that was killed on the floor of the House. That's probably likely the subject of this one, but it should be noted there's another provision in this bill which has been introduced separately that I think may have more support, and that is there's about $280 million of payments that were supposed to be made for the Capers School Group that were deferred to help the state with its budget problems. In deferring them, the legislature basically set up a plan to pay that money back over 20 years with interest. What the governor's recommending is, because we've had a strong state revenue growth,
Right.
has built up our ending balance, to pay that off now. That would save interest, and it would also lower the annual CAPERS payment by about $20 million. And frankly, because that is considered school spending,
Right.
it would also, frankly, reduce some of the cost of the school finance plan, although that's an indirect way of looking at it. And then the last bill on House General Orders that we're watching is House Bill 2507. This is the bill designed to address some of the liability concerns in work-based learning environments. We were neutral on the bill. Actually, United School Administrators did the testimony, but our legal and insurance team has worked with them. The committee adopted some amendments which have addressed some of our, not so much objections, but just concerns about workability. So we think it's been improved. I think there's still questions because, as our insurance people tell us, you can't get rid of liability. I mean, there's still risk out there. But the point of this is to try to make it easier for school districts to develop partnerships with local businesses to provide work-based internships, job shadowing, which we are strongly supportive of. So now let's move to a couple of bills this week which are still in committee. And Leah, you've been watching a couple in House Education. Do you want to tell us about?
Sure. Yeah. Earlier this week, the House Education Committee heard House Bill 2573, which would require Kansas students to take and pass a civics test in order to receive their high school diploma. The test would be modeled on the test that is given to persons who are becoming naturalized U.S. citizens, and that sounds fine and dandy. The chairman who brought the bill said, we all need to be better citizens. We need to read the Bill of Rights. We need to be more civically engaged. Not enough people are turning out to vote, those kinds of things. We testified in opposition because we, as those of you who are watching this probably know, Kansas high school students already are required to take 3 units of government, including U.S. government and U.S. history. So that's already really covered. In fact, they go into the U.S. Constitution. So we oppose it as unnecessary, duplicative. It really kind of goes into the lane of the State Board of Ed's constitutional responsibility to oversee schools and school district curriculum. So we oppose that bill.
And another rather dramatic hearing also yesterday, kind of in the same room after the vaping, issues were done, was a hearing in House Education, in a little different room, on House Bill 2601. Right,
and we were just monitoring. We don't have a position on this bill, but it's House Bill 2601, which would basically state that the legislature should have a say, along with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, on what kinds of vaccines are recommended or mandated for kids who are attending school. That's kind of the big picture on it. So there's been some concern among some groups over requiring meningitis and HPV vaccines, which kind of started this whole thing going. And so folks brought their concerns to Chairman Hubert, who's the chair of the House Education Committee, and he agreed to introduce this bill and have a hearing. There were probably close to 200 people there, most of them in favor of the bill. I think you would sort of characterize them in the popular media as anti-vaxxers. I mean, they would probably characterize themselves as anti-vaxxers. And then there was also a pretty strong public health contingent that testified against the bill, including KDHE Secretary Norman and Representative John Epley, who's in the legislature and is also a physician. There was quite a bit of very interesting testimony based on people's personal research. But at the end of the day, or the end of the hearing, the chairman said, the committee may or may not work the bill. I get the impression they won't, but he is in conversations with KDHE. He felt it was a good democratic exercise and just a good discussion of checks and balances. Apparently part of the issue some people had was that KDHE made the decision to make certain vaccines mandatory in May when the legislature's not meeting, and they felt there wasn't enough notice, although apparently there were several public hearings on it. So, it's kind of you don't know what you don't know, and then when your constituents bring something up to you, you hold a hearing on it.
So we did not weigh in on that. We should probably clarify that it doesn't change anything in current requirements that would affect schools. It is more just about the process by which vaccinations could be required or not required. I'll give a short report in House K-12 Budget Committee on House Bill 2526. This deals with changes in the state aid program for capital improvement, more commonly known as bonds and interest. I will note that there is a companion Senate bill coming up for hearing next week. But 2526, if you just read the title, it's kind of innocuous. It just removes Fort Leavenworth School District from the calculation of a capital improvement aid. And well, why does this matter?
Yeah.
So to put this as simple as possible, the way the capital bonds and interest aid formula works is the lowest assessed valuation per pupil district in the state, whoever it may be, just always happens to be Fort Leavenworth, is entitled to 75% of a bond issue. The state would pay 75%. But USD 207 Fort Leavenworth is not allowed to have bond issues,
right.
So it would never apply. Every $1,000 of assessed valuation per pupil above that loses, you get one lower percentage point. Okay.
Right.
What that basically means is the next lowest district is somewhere around $20,000 more valuation per pupil. So you move from 75% down to the 50s, and it shrinks down and then it drops from there. Again, that's an approach that has not been bothered the courts yet. But here's the problem. Because there is essentially no valuation growth at Fort Leavenworth, they always remain the same. Over time, virtually most other districts grow in valuation because even if you're losing students, you then have fewer to divide into your valuation, right, and that goes up. Or if you're gaining students or just staying the same, property valuation tends to grow over time. And what that means is when your starting point is flat and everyone else is growing, it means that over time, almost every district loses how much the state pays. What the state doesn't pay has to be raised locally, right, shifting more responsibility back to the property tax and creating inequities in the system. So what this bill would do, and before you all get excited, it would only apply to bond issues going forward. Right. Doesn't make any change currently, but we testified that unless the state acts, sooner or later, these inequities are going to raise constitutional problems, as well as simply being increasingly inequitable, because it means that lower wealth districts simply have to provide much higher property tax levies, right, burdens on their taxpayers just to provide comparable facilities. So we basically said, you're headed for trouble if you don't address this. I think there is awareness of that. Again, similar Senate bill, committee's not taken action yet, but they will. And then in that same committee, Leah, you had a hearing just yesterday, long day yesterday.
Yeah, 2552 is called the Reading Readiness Act. Sounds great. Everybody's for reading readiness. Unfortunately, it's another version of a voucher bill. What the bill says is that if a student is not reading on grade level in grades 3 or 4, they may take an amount equal to their base state aid and use that funding to put it into an education savings account, which functions like a voucher, and take that money and pay for private school tuition. Alternatively, if they want to stay in their public school, the state treasurer will set up an account for them that is generated by multiplying the at-risk weighting of 0.484 times your base state aid. You put that money into an account, and the student and their parent could use that money really throughout their career in public school, even up to high school graduation, to pay for additional interventions for their student. Those would have to be evidence-based interventions, according to the bill. There's nothing in the bill about whether those have to be proven to be effective, or more effective than what is already happening in the public
just up
school.
To the parent.
Yeah, it's really up to the parent.
I think this is evidence-based work for me. This is what I want.
This is what I want. So we opposed it on the grounds that, we oppose vouchers, taking money out of public schools and giving it to private schools, or to evidence-based interventions that we don't know are effective, is against what we need to be doing.
Correct. So that is probably an even greater stretch for a lot of legislators, but certainly the issue of reading, test scores, accountability, very much the theme of this legislature. So it's possible that will also come out of committee in some form, another key one for you to be watching. And again, I think another important opportunity to talk about what your district is doing to address, because again, no doubt by looking at various indicators, too many students are not where they need to be in terms of reading. How are we working to address that? That's really the key. And then a couple of other things that we'll just note before turning to next week. In the House Judiciary, no action yet on House Bill 2461, which is the one dealing with contingency fee-based legal contracts. Really, the intent is to get at school district lawsuits around things like vaping or local government lawsuits on opioids. KASB was invited to several meetings to work with legislators, the Attorney General, who's the proponent of this bill, and others. No agreement, no new alternative. So we'll continue to watch that. I think that the chairman of that committee does not really want to work it unless there is a sense of agreement. But certainly there was support from not only the Attorney General, but some other influential groups around that. And then finally, Leah, you may want to talk about in that same committee, House Judiciary 2532.
This would authorize the Kansas State Department of Education to enter into a contract with a private vendor who would then install stop arm cameras, they're commonly called, install cameras on school buses that would help catch people who are passing school buses while they're stopped. They have their stop arm out, and people, apparently there's like up to 1,000 cases a day. They have some data that people are stopping school buses when kids are getting on and off. Incredibly dangerous. I would just note this local school district would then have to, adopt a resolution agreeing to work with the camera. So it's not the camera vendor. So it's not a mandate. It's a permissive bill. There were several concerns though from the committee about privacy. I guess there's up to like 7 cameras that are positioned on the bus, and could you see the driver's face? Could you see the license plate? And if so, if you were the owner of the car, but someone else was driving the car when they committed this infraction, what kind of implications are there for that? There would be a $250 civil fine that would be levied by KSDE. That money would go into a School Bus Safety Education Act, a School Bus Safety Education Fund that would help educate people around why you should not pass a bus with the
and those and those concerns, I think, are, if this sounds familiar, it's because this concept has been around for several sessions. It has never passed, and I think a large reason for that is, in fact, kind of sounds, well, this is really dangerous and it's a state law. Why don't? But precisely for those kind of privacy or who's driving, who's at fault issues. So we'll continue to monitor that.
Interesting wrinkle this year was that the law enforcement community seems to be behind this time, and I think that has not been the case before.
And it may be that perhaps, like in so many things, maybe the technology is to a point where people will feel more comfortable. We'll keep you posted on that. Well, before we wrap up, let's talk about the big issues we see coming up next week in terms of hearings. Leah has a list. I'm trying to peer through my glasses to see. Probably we'll just start in the Senate Education Committee. Two bills, one 337, Senate Bill 337, would expand the provision in state law requiring free ACT test and WorkKeys test to students enrolled in accredited non-public schools as well as public schools. We have a single state contract to do that. And then Senate Bill 353 is an innocuous sounding bill in some ways that basically says local school boards should allocate money for academic improvement and to be reasonably calculated for students to achieve the Rose standards. On one hand, you could say, well, sure, that's what we're doing and we're committed. Our concern, of course, is that this could be interpreted as saying the problem is districts are not spending the money the right way. And while, of course, we can all continue to look at how well our dollars are going, I think there's a lot of evidence that this will be seen by some as simply, well, you're not spending enough on instruction, and looking at those budget categories and not the actual effectiveness of dollars. So we'll be wanting to speak on that. We're not going to cover every committee agenda, but if we move on. Also Monday afternoon, we will be testifying on the Department of Education budget in the House. As I said, we've done that in the Senate. This is just part of the normal process where the two houses budget committees kind of take the governor's recommendation, look at possibly making changes, moving that through the process. And then Leah, I think you're next on Tuesday, perhaps?
Tuesday in Senate Ed.
Right.
Yeah. We'll be monitoring a bill requiring KSD and DCF to prepare an annual report on the educational outcomes for kids in foster care. And then we will also be testifying on Senate Bill 410, which requires you to publish your bullying policies and to publish a bullying report. We're going to oppose the bill. It sounds kind of bad. We're opposing a bullying bill, but here are the reasons. A lot of this is already required. We already published most of that information. That being said, we also know that the bullying task force that met throughout the past several months has forwarded their recommendations to the School Mental Health Advisory Council, which is meeting to really go into more about kind of what the definition and causes of bullying are. That's really what we need to be focusing on. The task force did not make any recommendations about additional requirements on reporting.
Right.
And so we would like to see us focus on the definition of bullying and to try to kind of combat the causes of bullying rather than coming at it after the fact.
Right. So that, but again, those of you that are interested, in a number of people who are following that issue, a number of you are working on this locally.
That's right.
If you have an opinion or want to weigh into that, please do. What does that bring us up to? It looks like Senate
Ed.
Leah just lost the calendar.
It's coming back. Don't
okay,
worry.
Very good.
You're going to be.
I will be in Senate Education.
That's right.
Testifying on the Senate version of the Capital Improvement Aid Program,
there it is.
Which is Senate Bill 382. So again, if you're interested, if you're thinking of having a bond issue in the future,
right,
you'll definitely want to be following these bills and their implications. And then
House Ed budget.
Right, House K-12 Ed budget. What may be the last hearing of this cycle, we don't know. Before the deadline, we'll talk about it in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
House Bill 2582 would, as I understand it, essentially transfer the current behavioral health intervention pilot funding into a weighting. There was a proposal of this last year, did not go anywhere. I think there is desire to more institutionalize this. What is not clear to me in my first reading is what implications this may have for future funding or expansion. Mm-hmm. By all accounts, this is a very successful, important program. We'd like to see grow. We'll support whatever way there is to do that. I don't know as we have a particular position on if it should be or when it should become a weighting, but certainly are supporting the concept. And that pretty much moves us through the big things. Keep your eye out because items may still be added. Today, as a matter of fact, still is. No, both House and Senate have met, so I guess it was the deadline for non-exempt bills to be introduced in the House and Senate. What that simply means is there are a limited number of committees called exempt committees that could have a hearing on a bill at any time. Most committees, there is a deadline for the committee to introduce the bill or individuals to introduce a bill. That is passed. A lot of hearings next week and committee meetings. A week from Monday will be the last day for committees to meet before turnaround. If you're new to the process, turnaround is the deadline for non-exempt bills to be passed by their first house. The idea is that, well, then you turn around and go to the second house. So there, again, a lot of bills, and generally what we consider budget bills, important bills like that, are not bound by these deadlines. But for the most part, many of the bills that we've been talking about will be considered dead if they do not get through their first house, essentially by the end of February.
And so a House bill would have to pass the House, the Senate bill would have to pass the Senate. March
is set aside, the first couple of weeks is set aside for the second house to review the bills that came through. basically the last week of March, first week of April is then conference committees to try to resolve those differences between the two. First adjournment is April 3rd, I believe,
So.
that Friday. And then, of course, the final veto session, which can be anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, begins in late April. So the point is, a lot is going on, but we will be getting into the winnowing out process soon. So stay tuned. Please follow our daily Facebook Live presentations if you choose. And if you're viewing this, it means we figured out how to get this in a form that you can view it. So thank you very much. And if not, I guess this has been a colossal waste of time for us. So hopefully we'll do that. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next week.